I stood in the community center, the HOA board smug faces staring me down, their president waving a fine notice like it was a royal decree. The room smelled of stale coffee and self-righteousness. She was mid-rant, accusing me of violating aesthetic standards with my barn roof, demanding I pay $10,000 or face a lien on my property. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just slid a single document across the table, a faded, notarized water rights certificate from 1968, signed over to my grandfather by the state. The lawyer's eyes widened as he skimmed it, realizing I controlled every drop of water, feeding their precious gated community. The president's voice faltered, and the room went silent. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of that paper do the talking. Let me take you back to how this started. I'd moved to this quiet valley in northern Colorado 3 years ago, chasing a simpler life after decades in the city. My grandfather's old homestead was all I had left of him, a 40-acre plot with a sagging cabin, a barn I'd been fixing up, and a creek that cut through the pines like a silver thread. I wasn't looking to impress anyone. I just wanted to patch the roof, plant a garden, maybe sit on the porch with a beer and watch the stars without someone telling me how to live. The land wasn't much to look at, but it was mine, paid off with Grandpa's savings and deeded to me when he passed. I'd drive up from Denver every weekend, hammer in hand, breathing air that didn't smell like asphalt. The neighbors in the nearby subdivision, with their manicured lawns and matching mailboxes, didn't bother me at first. I figured we'd coexist, my rusty barn a mile from their cul-de-sacs, out of sight, out of mind. Then the letters started. The first one arrived taped to my barn door in early 2022. A crisp HOA notice claiming my roof's new tin panels were non-compliant with their architectural guidelines. I laughed at first. My land wasn't even part of their subdivision. Grandpa's homestead predated the gated community by decades, carved out long before the McMansion sprouted. I ignored it, assuming it was a mistake. But then came the second letter, and the third, each one sharper, threatening fines, liens, even legal action if I didn't replace the roof with something approved. I drove to the county office, pulled my property records, and confirmed what I already knew. My land was independent, outside their jurisdiction. I wrote a polite email to the HOA president, a woman named Karen who wore pearls like they were a personality trait, explaining the situation and attaching a scan of my deed. No response. Instead, a week later, a $2,000 fine arrived in my mailbox, followed by a notice that it had doubled if I didn't comply by month's end. I tried to stay reasonable. I'm not a hothead, never have been. I sent another email, then a certified letter, quoting the county's zoning laws and my deed's explicit exemption from any HOA oversight. I even offered to meet Karen and the board to clear things up. Nothing. They didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, they escalated. A sheriff's deputy showed up at my cabin one Saturday, looking embarrassed as he handed me a citation for unpermitted construction. The HOA had called the county, claiming I was building without approval. I showed him the permits, stamped and filed months earlier, and he shrugged, saying, "Sounds like they are just mad you're not one of them." By spring 2023, the fines hit $10,000, and Karen sent a letter threatening to seize my barn if I didn't pay. My partner, Sarah, was furious. She'd spent weekends helping me send beams and plant wildflowers, and now she was scared we'd lose it all. I wasn't angry yet, but I was done playing nice. That's when I stopped writing emails and started digging. I'd always known Grandpa's land came with water rights, something about the creek and an old irrigation agreement. He'd mentioned it when I was a kid, but I never paid much attention. Now, I needed answers. I spent nights at the county recorder's office, poring over microfiche and faded maps. The librarian, a kind woman who'd known Grandpa, helped me unearth a 1968 certificate granting my family sole ownership of the water rights for the entire valley's aquifer. It wasn't just my creek. It was the underground spring that fed every well, sprinkler, and faucet in the HOA subdivision. The state had granted it to Grandpa for his service as a civil engineer in the Army Corps, building dams in the 1950s. The HOA's developers had built their community without securing those rights, assuming no one would notice. I cross-checked the county's infrastructure records and found a 1972 agreement. The subdivision's water system was legally dependent on my family's aquifer access. If I chose to, I could shut off their water with a single filing. I didn't want to play that card yet. I wanted them to feel the mistake first. I spent months preparing, quietly, methodically. I hired a surveyor to confirm my property lines, ensuring the bond was 100% on my land. I filed a formal complaint with the State Water Board, documenting the HOA's overreach and their failure to secure water rights. I requested a hearing, knowing it'd force the HOA to show their hand. Sarah thought I was crazy, spending every weekend buried in legal books or driving to the county seat, but she saw the look in my eyes and stopped arguing. My neighbors in the subdivision started avoiding me. One even whispered troublemaker when I passed her at the gas station. I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing it for the land, for Grandpa's memory, for the principle of it. By fall 2023, I had everything I needed: the water rights certificate, the surveyor's report, and a letter from the state confirming my legal authority over the aquifer. I requested a meeting with the HOA board, saying only that I wanted to discuss the fines. They agreed, probably thinking they'd intimidate me into submission. That brings us back to the community center, November 2023. The board sat behind a long table, Karen at the center, flanked by her treasurer and a lawyer who looked like he charged by the smeg. About 20 homeowners filled the folding chairs, curious or annoyed, probably expecting me to beg or argue. Karen started with her usual speech about community standards and how my bond was an eyesore. I let her talk, my folder resting on my lap. When she finished, I stood, walked to the table, and placed the water rights certificate in front of the lawyer. I didn't raise my voice. I just said, "You've been fining me for a bond on land you don't control. But let's talk about something you do need: water." The lawyer's face changed as he read the document, then passed it to Karen, who squinted like it was written in another language. I explained, calmly, that their entire subdivision relied on my aquifer, that their wells were technically trespassing on my water rights, and that the state was already reviewing my complaint. If I pressed it, their taps would run dry by spring. The room was so quiet I could hear the lawyer's pen drop. Karen stammered, saying it was a misunderstanding, that they'd look into it. I didn't blink. I said I'd drop the water board complaint if they voided all fines, issued a written apology, and amended their bylaws to exclude my property forever. They had 48 hours to decide, or I'd file for an injunction. They folded in 24. By the next evening, I had a letter from the board, signed by Karen and notarized, nullifying the $10,000 in fines and acknowledging my land's exemption. The State Water Board sent a follow-up, confirming the HOA had scrambled to secure secondary water access, at their expense. Karen resigned a month later, citing personal reasons. The new board president, a quiet guy who'd stayed out of the fight, sent me an email apologizing again, offering to pay my legal fees. I declined. I didn't need their money. The neighborhood changed after that. Some homeowners started waving when I drove past. Others avoided eye contact, probably embarrassed they'd backed Karen's crusade. Sarah and I finished the barn roof that spring, painting it a bright red that would have made Grandpa laugh. I sit on the porch now, watching the creek glint under the stars, and it feels like home again. They don't bother me anymore. They know better.